The year is 39 after the birth of Christ. A summer night on Lake Nemi, 20 miles south of Rome. The air smells of burning incense and roasted meat and something else, something sweeter and more disturbing that the slave named Eutychus cannot quite identify. He stands at the stern of the largest ship ever built on an inland lake, a floating palace nearly 250 feet long. Its deck covered with gardens and colonnades and fountains that somehow function even on water. Eutychus is 19 years old. He was purchased 6 months ago from a trader who specialized in beautiful youths from the eastern provinces. His duties have been explained to him in terms he did not fully understand at first, but understands now with terrible clarity. Tonight he will serve wine at the emperor's private gathering. He will keep his eyes down. He will respond immediately to any command, and he will never, under any circumstances, speak of what he witnesses to anyone outside this floating world of silk and gold and acts that would be punished by death if committed by anyone except the man who rules the known world. The Emperor Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus reclines on a couch of purple silk at the center of the main deck. The Romans call him Caligula, Little Boot, a childhood nickname from his years in military camps that he now despises but cannot escape. He is 27 years old. He has ruled Rome for 2 years. And in those 2 years, he has transformed the most powerful empire on earth into his personal theater of appetites that recognize no boundaries whatsoever. Eutychus watches from his position near the wine vessels as figures move through torchlight toward the emperor's couch. He recognizes some of them. Senators whose names are spoken with respect in the forum. Women whose families have held power for generations. Priests of temples that are supposed to represent divine virtue. All of them moving toward the emperor with expressions that mix terror and anticipation in equal measure, because refusing an invitation to Caligula's pleasure barge is not survival, but merely delayed execution. What happens next on this floating palace, what Eutychus will witness over the next 7 hours until dawn finally ends the gathering, will be recorded in fragments by historians who lived through this reign. Suetonius will write of it decades later, choosing his words carefully because some acts strain the capacity of language to convey. Cassius Dio will reference events on the lake without describing them fully, noting only that they exceeded even what Rome had learned to expect from its most depraved emperor. Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher who visited Rome during Caligula's reign, will describe the emperor as a man who had discovered that absolute power meant absolute freedom to transform every appetite into action. The torches on the pleasure barge flicker as the evening begins. Eutychus grips his wine vessel and prepares to serve. He does not yet know that by morning 3 guests will be dead, 2 by the emperor's direct command, and 1 by their own hand rather than continue participating. He does not know that what he witnesses tonight will haunt him for the remaining 40 years of his life, surfacing in nightmares that will make him cry out in languages he no longer consciously remembers. He does not know that his survival depends entirely on remaining invisible, useful, and silent. What you think you know about Caligula is wrong, not because the stories are exaggerated, because they are incomplete. The tales you have heard, the madness, the cruelty, the horse he supposedly made a senator, these are the stories that survived because they could be told in polite company. The stories that did not survive, the ones that ancient historians referenced but refused to describe in full, the ones that were erased from official records because even Rome had limits on what could be publicly acknowledged, those stories reveal an emperor whose depravity exceeded anything the ancient world had witnessed before or would witness again. Tonight you will learn the 13 most disturbing acts attributed to Caligula by ancient sources, not the familiar tales of political murder and financial excess. The other stories, the ones involving intimate violations that even his enemies struggled to articulate. The ones involving rituals that blended religion and carnality in ways that horrified priests of every faith. The ones involving spectacles designed not merely to entertain, but to demonstrate that the emperor existed beyond all moral constraint. Some of what I am about to tell you was hidden deliberately by ancient authors who feared that explicit description would corrupt their readers. Some was recorded in texts that the early church destroyed because they revealed too clearly what pagan power could become. Some survived only in fragments, in private letters, in graffiti preserved by volcanic ash, in legal documents that mentioned imperial crimes without specifying details. But the evidence exists. Archaeological discoveries in the 20th century confirm details that historians had dismissed as impossible exaggeration. The pleasure barges themselves were recovered from Lake Nemi, their scale and luxury exceeding even ancient descriptions. Skeletal remains have been found with marks suggesting fates that match the worst of what Suetonius implied. Palace excavations revealed chambers whose purpose becomes clear only when ancient texts are read alongside architectural evidence. Caligula ruled for only 4 years before his own guards murdered him. In those 4 years, he demonstrated what happens when a human being with unlimited power decides that satisfying every appetite is not just possible, but required. He did not simply abuse power. He explored its absolute limits with the systematic curiosity of a man conducting experiments on what pleasure and pain and domination could achieve when nothing prevented their fullest expression. Before we descend into this darkness together, if you value content that reveals the hidden truths of history, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Comment below, telling me where in the world you are listening from. These stories have been buried for 2,000 years. They deserve to be heard by everyone willing to confront what human nature becomes when all restraints are removed. Let us begin with the floating palaces themselves, because what happened on those ships reveals everything about the emperor who built them. You have never seen ships like these. No one alive today has seen ships like these, because they were deliberately sunk after Caligula's death, hidden beneath 40 feet of water for 19 centuries, until Mussolini drained the lake to recover them in the 1930s. The larger vessel measured 240 feet long and 79 feet wide. That is larger than many modern cruise ships. It featured heated floors using the same hypocaust system that warmed Roman baths. It had running water supplied through lead pipes, connected to a pumping system, whose engineering still impresses modern naval architects. The deck was covered with marble and gold and mosaic tiles depicting scenes that archaeologists initially refused to publish because of their explicit content. This was not a ship designed for sailing. The lake was only 3 miles across. This was a ship designed for hosting gatherings, where what happened needed to remain invisible from shore. A ship designed for activities that could not occur in palaces where servants might talk. A ship where the emperor could indulge appetites that even Rome, tolerant Rome, decadent Rome, would struggle to accept. Ancient sources describe what happened on these vessels in terms that require careful reading. Suetonius writes that Caligula hosted gatherings featuring the wives and husbands of senators who were required to attend and required to participate in whatever the emperor demanded. He writes that the emperor would inspect guests upon arrival, lifting chins to examine faces, commenting on physical attributes with the casual expertise of a livestock buyer at market. What Suetonius does not write explicitly, but what his contemporary readers understood, was that these inspections determined assignments for the evening's activities. The emperor selected partners for himself and for others. He arranged combinations. He commanded specific acts and observed their completion. Refusal meant immediate consequences that ranged from social destruction to physical harm to death. A senator named Valerius Catullus attended one such gathering in 38 and was commanded to participate in acts with partners, not of his choosing. When he attempted to excuse himself by claiming illness, Caligula had physicians examine him on the deck in front of all assembled guests. When the physicians found nothing wrong, Catullus was informed that his reluctance itself was a crime against the emperor's hospitality. What followed was described by Suetonius only as appropriate punishment for ingratitude. Catullus survived the night, but killed himself within the week. His family's property was seized by the Imperial Treasury. His wife was summoned to subsequent gatherings without him. The ships featured private chambers below deck, whose dimensions suggest specific purposes. Rooms barely large enough for a single couch. Rooms with unusual fixtures mounted